Hi there everyone, Foxy Fern here, and welcome back to Animating a Squirrel in Maya. So let's take a look at what this is shaping up to be. Not too bad. And as I mentioned in the last video, today our focus is going to be adding some life to his ears and to his mouth, and then also maybe some rotation in his body to make the silhouettes a little more interesting, or rather his poses, and just kind of breathing some last little bit of life into him before we get into animating the tail. So this should be fairly straightforward as far as his ears go. It's mostly going to be some overlapping action with falling in for the jump, and then maybe when he stops and looks at us, we'll do like a quick little ear twitch or something, like he's acknowledging that we're here. But for the most part, let's see, bring our graph editor over here. This is tricky doing this all on one screen. I am a 2-monitor kind of gal, but I want you guys to be able to see everything that I'm doing, so I will just have to suffer first world problems, you know. Anyway, let's see. We've got... Oops. So he's just going to come in, and we'll... I'm just gonna be rotating for now in object mode. Actually, I'm not sure that's a great idea because they're rotating opposite of each other. That's not quite the result I want. So we're gonna change this to world. And now if I rotate back, that's giving it the result that I want. Now you have to be careful when animating in object and world this way, because you're not seeing what the gimbal lock is looking like. And so if you're doing something like animating a human arm rotating around like this, it's very important to pay attention to what your gimbal rotations are looking like. But for these ears, I'm not terribly concerned because they're not going to be rotating too far off of where their rotation axes are right now, because like we're not gonna have them down like so where this graph is getting up past 100. That's too extreme, so I'm not worried about gimbal lock right now. We're just gonna animate these very quickly, and then we'll do like a little bit of an offset of them to give it like some slight overlapping motion to make it, again, feel a little more natural. All right, so there we go. We've got some basic level of ear motion going on, and he does just a little twitch with his right ear here when he stops. And when you're watching this in full speed, you don't really see the ear motions that much, but when you go in and you sort of frame by frame it, you can see a little more. Like right here, they're kind of bending down as he jumps up like that. It's one of those things where by adding this type of level of detail, you're going to make your animation feel that much more polished, that much more organic. And the fact that somebody doesn't notice that you've animated the ears is better than somebody noticing that you haven't animated the ears. It's good when someone is like, oh, this animation feels right and I don't know why. That's okay. If a non-animator is giving you that kind of feedback, that's really good feedback. An animator is going to notice, oh, hey, you didn't animate the ears. That could make your animation look better. But yeah, so that's okay if it's not super noticeable. Now, one thing I do want to do here is actually offset these a little bit. So you can see I was just sort of animating. Let's change our perspective view here. I was just animating these at the same time, so the ears are completely on the same keys. And, you know, if you really wanted to, you could go into like super crazy details of changing how much they're rotating, and sometimes one is before the other. But for now, we're just gonna offset these keys by one frame. So you can either select all your keys like this and drag them, or another thing I like to do if I really want to make sure that I'm in control is that you can go into your graph editor, and in this first box here is the keys. You can say plus equals. In this case, we want to offset by one frame, so we'll say plus equals 1, and that'll shift it over. And the reason I like doing stuff like that sometimes is so that I don't accidentally grab my keys. I'm like, oh crap, I went the wrong direction, and then all this crazy stuff happens. So that's an easy way to have a high level of control for that. So yeah, you're not going to be able to tell in full speed that I offset those ears by one frame, but that's just going to add that other level of nuance to the animation. So the next thing we want to do is animate this mouth. So let's check out these controls here. We've got, this is going to make him smile, is it? That is potentially something we could use for when he stops and looks at us, but I don't know if I like too much the deformation of that. Yeah, we could mess with that just a little bit. That might be okay. For the most part, we're just gonna mess with these teeth. So let's check this out. Oh, that didn't seem to do anything. Okay, so this is his mouth. And then this one, okay, that's his upper. Ooh, we don't want to translate because that's giving us some really weird effects. But we can do this. And we can do this. Roar! That could be a lot of fun for some other things. But yeah, all right. I just wanted to familiarize myself with what these controls are doing. And it looks like I haven't set a key on these on frame 0. So we're going to do that now. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do with these controls just yet. So I think I'm going to experiment a little bit with them and see if I can come up with something that I like. Okay, so here are the results of animating the mouth. As you probably noticed from the time lapse, I was struggling with some of the controls and like when I should make his mouth open and how far I should take it. I had initially thought, oh, let's have him like open his mouth too as he's taking off here. But in the end, I decided that was a little bit too much. That if he's just kind of opening his mouth all the time, that's going to be a little bit distracting and it won't feel as organic. So I ended up only having him open his mouth on his way down the first 2 hops, and then just a tiny bit as he's like coming up to look at us. And my reasoning for that is when he's running away, he's less joyful and free-spirited and more trying to get away from us, basically. And then the other thing I noticed was these little mouth control here. What I wanted to do was make him not be smiling as much when he looks at the camera. But when I move these controls, if I move them very far at all, for one thing, they're kind of moving in a weird axis. Like I would expect them to move sort of like straight up and down parallel with the teeth, but they're kind of like moving sideways, and right now I don't really have control over that unless I want to go in the rig and kind of break it, but I don't want to do that because that's like a whole other level of technical stuff that I don't want to get into right now. Also, I noticed that when I did translate them down, it doesn't deform well with the teeth, and ultimately, I just don't think it's going to be a very appealing thing to do. So we're going to leave it at that. And I'm pretty happy with the results. It wasn't doing exactly what I was hoping for it to do, but it does add a little bit of a nice touch, I feel. So the last thing I want to do to the body is add a bit more rotation to his torso here, like, well, maybe with this control more, or maybe we'll use both of these, kind of rotate stuff around. I want to fix some things like right here, the silhouette isn't very appealing because I would love for it to have like a nice curve. So then I want to go in and see if we can fix this. And now sometimes you're going to be limited with the rig, but that's when you go bug your tech animators. Be like, hey, I really want to make the character do this and it'll look good, right? Can you make the rig do that? So yeah, always ask. But, that's only if you're in a studio setting. Obviously, if you were just animating like I'm animating right now, you can't really talk to the tech animator. So either you have to deal with it or figure out how to fix it yourself. But what I want to do with this here, now I don't have too many keys on this control specifically, so I could animate this control on this layer. In fact, I don't even know, what did I do here? Why is this? That's translate Z. I don't know why I did that. I'm not sure that was intentional, actually. What happens if I delete that? Yeah, weird. I didn't even mean for that to be a thing. Okay, so technically I could animate this control on this layer, but if I want to do anything to the head, I really don't want to change what I have here. And as you can see, I have quite a few keys that I don't want to mess up. So then what I will do is take this control, and then over here in my animation layer tab, I'm going to hit new layer. This button is new layer with selected objects. So now we have this animation layer. And animation layers, if you want to know more about how to properly utilize them and what all they can do, I would love to explain that in another video. So let me know if you would like to know more about animation layers, because that's a whole other subject on its own, but they are magical and you should be using them for sure. Now you can rename this layer, but I'm not going to, because this is like the only layer I'm going to use, and we're just going to bake it down when we're done. So basically, I just want to make sure I save a key on the beginning and end for this animation layer. And then what we can do is we can go in here and like have him say rotate. Well, except it doesn't like that. It's doing some fun gimbal stuff. Blech. I hate gimbal, guys. So now he can like rotate like this, and it's not messing up the stuff that we already have there. But now you can see like he's doing this weird thing where he's super bent all the time now. But what we can do is, let's see. So we want him to be rotated here. I don't necessarily know this is the position I want him in. Let's see. I'm just gonna rotate this a little more, but we don't want him to do that until he's coming down. So right here, we'll save a key, and then we'll grab these keys in our graph editor, and we're on this animation layer, and I want those values to be at 0, which basically means it's not affecting the layer below it. And then once we get to about here, I want it to be zeroed out again so he doesn't look all deformed. So I'll grab those keys and I'll hit 0. And now he's just doing this on this layer. And if I turn off this layer, then it's not affecting it. I can also take this slider here. If I decide, oh, I like it, but it's a little too much, I can just turn this down to the point where I like it. And then I can grab the rotations. Well, maybe the translations too, because we might want to affect those. And then I can bake these down. I have a little bake simulation button up there that I'm pressing. And then we can delete this layer. Woohoo! Now the problem is we have a key on every single frame. And that can be super annoying if you're wanting to modify stuff by hand a lot. So I tend to wait to do animation layers till I'm pretty far along in the animation. And like, so I definitely don't do it on my blocking stage or anything like that. But this is the stage where I do want to use animation layers for things that I already have looking pretty good, and I just want to add a level of detail on top of that. So I'm going to go through here and basically do this treatment to the whole animation and make sure our silhouettes are looking good from every angle. Well, I mean, I'm going to make sure our silhouettes are looking good from the camera angle, basically. But the habit I don't like to do, mostly because of my games background, is I don't want to, say, grab a control, let's see here, like grab this guy and be like, oh, okay, I want it to look good here. So it looks good in camera, but now if I go into here, well, as it turns out, it actually looks okay in the rest of the world. But what could potentially happen is I could make him go too much sideways like this, and then if you look in our camera view, it still looks okay. It's not great, but you know, I could be like, oh, there we go, now it looks good. But then if you look at it from another view, like this top view especially, it's gonna start to look really weird. And so I like to make sure, ooh, especially that, yuck. I like to make sure that my characters look good from all views to an extent, like they don't look off balance, there's not anything really weird going on. And then if you are animating to a camera, which in this case, that is the way I have set this up, that is obviously your most important thing to animate to. So yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and go through and give this treatment to the whole animation. Okay guys, here are the results of that. And I think it's looking pretty good. Again, I didn't go with anything too over the top for the end since he's just kind of hurrying, getting out of the way. But I made sure that on the first jump down, he's rotating a little bit away from camera. And then on the second, he's rotating a little bit towards the camera. And then that kind of helps with the whole like, oh, he's noticing us as he's jumping the second time. And that's why he didn't care on the first jump, is because he wasn't looking towards us. So there we go. I think that's in a pretty good spot for our body animation. And you know what that means? It's time for the tail. Now we're not going to get done with the tail today for sure, because it's not going to be quite as time consuming as the body, I don't think, since we don't have to worry about the initial emotion. But to make things like tails look really good, it's definitely something that we want to spend a lot of time on. So if I can actually figure out how I turned the tail off in the first place, that would be super helpful. Ah, there we go. Tail viz on. Huzzah. Let's just see what this looks like with the tail. Yeah, doesn't look very good, does it, with the stiff tail? So yeah, this is going to take a lot of work, but I think it's going to be worth it in the end. As I said last video, it is very important to get some reference for stuff like this. Like, sure, you could just do a basic, like, overlapping action, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to have the tail follow through like this with every motion that the character does. And even though this is a super cartoony, super simplified character, I do still want the tail to feel like it is part of a squirrel, which means we're going to do that job the best by using video reference. So what I did was search for some video reference of a squirrel that I wanted to use on YouTube, and I'll show it to you here. And I will put a link in the description in this video and the next one if you want to look at this reference for yourself. But here's just a quick little video of the squirrel moving around. Don't know what he's doing there, but we're not going to include that part of it. But this little twitchiness that the tail is doing as he's like hanging out and even looking at the camera like our squirrel is doing is something I really want to incorporate, as well as every time he hops along, we can really break down that animation and use it to give a bit of realism to our cartoony squirrel. So let's see here. I think the best part for me was earlier on in this video. If you were unaware, much like I was till very recently, you can actually frame by frame through a YouTube video by using the comma and period keys, or I guess it's also the open and closed caret brackets. I don't know what they're called. But yeah, you know what I mean. Anyway, we can just frame by frame through this back and forth to get an idea of what our tail should look like when he hops. Was this where I wanted the hop from? It was right there. So this right here at 11 seconds in, this is golden. So it's perfect for us because this is the starting position of our tail with our squirrel. And so we can just basically frame by frame through this and match these shapes as he is hopping. Now I'm going to put this video reference on my other monitor because I just don't have enough room to cram all of this onto one screen. So that will just have to do for now. Okay. So we have our special little, or I thought I did. Where's my, oh, here we go. Let's go to our squirrel tab up here. And then now I have this tail button that I made oh so long ago. Now it's not going to be perfect because again, this body is not like a real squirrel. So it's going to look a little weird, but basically the idea is to just make it feel like it's really part of a squirrel. And instead of starting on the very first frame, I think what I want to do is go from this position here to where he's taking off, because that's a good spot in our video reference that we can mimic. And then we'll just we're just going to focus on this first bit here, this first two hops. And then probably next video is when we're going to get into the little bit where we're adding some character. So I'm going to go ahead and start posing out the tail. Well, guys, as you probably noticed from watching that time lapse, I was really struggling with this tail animation. What happened is that the rig seems to have been made in such a way that I can't really do what I want to be able to do with the tail. It's almost as though the person who rigged this character had beginner animators in mind and they wanted to make some sort of like automation type of thing with this tail. Even though it's FK, it's kind of like sneakily IK, or there's some sort of expressions going on underneath the hood that I'm not super familiar with. But basically, I like to have 100% control over what my character is doing at all times, and it doesn't seem like I have that kind of control on this rig. So, for example, if I go to this tail here and I rotate this control, what I would expect to happen with this being FK and all is that the control below it is basically going to stay in the same position that it's in right now. So I would expect to rotate this and have this FK control stay in the same relative rotation to the one above it as it is now. But as you can see, if I rotate and I don't have these both, oh my god, go away. If I select this control and I rotate it, eventually the one below it is just gonna like actually pass it in rotation. So it's really weird, and it gives me these shapes that I don't like at all. And unfortunately, I can't make this tail do what I want it to do, which would be to move like a real squirrel. So unfortunately, I have surrendered to just making it work with the way that this rig seems to want me to animate it. So I'm just making it sort of a springy tail, and I'm still sort of struggling with this. I don't like it at all. I don't like how this is turning out. So I might have to do some more fiddling around so that I can better understand this rig. And if I experiment at all with that off camera, I'll be sure to update you guys with what I have found out. But for now, I think we're going to call it good. It's sort of working as just a bouncy tail, but you know, like if I were doing 2D right now, it would be really easy for me to just draw exactly what I want it to do. And these are like 3D is great in a lot of times where it's going to be faster to create an animation if you have a character already to go. But in some cases, it's going to be easier to do 2D animation, like in this case where I am constantly fighting the rig and I can't get it to make the shapes and do the movements that I want it to do, that I have in my head. So if I were drawing, this would be a lot easier. But as it is, I need to make do with what the rig is capable of doing, and therefore I'm just going to go with a less realistic tail animation, and we'll just go along with this cartoony motion. But we are going to finish that up in the next episode, as I feel this one has become quite long with how much struggling I was doing with the tail. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.